Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Buku Sayisa Supernatural Processed Ethiopia from Goût & Co. And there's the bag right there. And Goût & Co, based out of Chengdu, China. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on several occasions, including our recent review of the Rafisa, a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. And in that review, I mentioned that we did pick a coffee out from Goût & Co. that was intended to be a very intense coffee. And unsurprisingly, that is this one right here, as it is a very heavily processed coffee. And the main reason for picking this one out was because some of the issues we had had with Goût & Co. in the past was that their coffees weren't necessarily the most intense. So we decided to go on the complete opposite side of the spectrum and pick one that was very much intended to be that way. So it'll be interesting to see how this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 64. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe and a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, even though this one is a bit more heavily processed, you can tell that it isn't quite as light as some of the other coffees that we have reviewed from them in the past. That being said, Goût & Co. does still remain one of the lighter roasting coffee roasters in the entirety of China that we've reviewed up to this point. So even if this one isn't necessarily the lightest one that we've had from them, it still does skew on the very light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 40, first impression. Through the V60, and the coffee was offering a notable bit of intensity in the darker fruit sense, with a bit of the traditional natural Ethiopian berry and perfumey floral aspects to it. It wasn't necessarily overly heavy this first time around, but there was almost an olive-like fermentiness that does come with anaerobic coffees, as it offered plenty of the expected intensity all around. So what we were hoping for was intensity, and we certainly got plenty of that this first time around. Day 43. Through the Chemex, and the coffee does continue to act like an anaerobic processed coffee, as it's notably more heavy and fermenty today with less definition, and plenty more of that olive-like feel once again with some very strong red fruit aspects as well. So these first 2 days were days I didn't enjoy by any means, so I felt like adjustments were certainly needed. Day 46 through the April brewer, and the coffee is the best it's been to this point by a distance actually, largely due to the fact that the strong fermentiness from earlier is toned down, leading to the notion that it likely benefits from some lower extraction adjustments. Darker berry aspects coming through a little cleaner this time around with plenty of brightness as well. So I said, this is probably the direction that we need to go for this coffee. And in hindsight, this actually might have been the best experience and day we had for the entirety of the time working through this coffee. So it's possible that maybe either a flat bottom brewer or the April brewer is just the best method for this one. Day 49 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, lower temperatures, higher concentration, and the coffee does continue to struggle with the vintaged over-processing feel ranging from the heavier red berry aspects, including cherry and watermelon, to the wine-like fermentiness with heavy grapes, and also the unpleasant olive-like feel. Relatively toned down in general compared to maybe some other anaerobic coffees, but it has all of those characteristics that I don't necessarily enjoy from them. Day 52 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee is possibly at its best as it's a bit more toned down relative to some of the previous experiences. So in hindsight, the V60 really seems to struggle anytime we were brewing it with that brew method. The Chemex days seemed just a little bit better than those V60 days, and that April day did seem like the best that it was, but it just felt a little bit better balanced and even overall, as it's still primarily skewing in that heavier berry and floral sense. So a lot of those perfumey florals, those darker perfumey florals, but less of the undesirable qualities are felt this time around. Day 55 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and I honestly couldn't tell if this was better or not quite as good, as the whole beans smell fine, and that's one thing that I really kind of took away, is that at least initially when I started working on this review right now and took in the aroma of the whole beans, it actually didn't smell that good, but when I was taking the notes on this coffee, the whole beans smelled just fine. When you're grinding it, the strong fermenty quality does come out, and it's present in the aroma of the coffee itself. Intense heavier berry aspects, yet again with a relatively clean comparison to some of the earlier days, but even then it's a relative scale, it's not clean by most metrics. Day 58, final note that we do have through the V60 with our standard recipe, and it's been in line with the experiences from earlier, as it does have that slight olive-like feel. It does come out in a heavier processed coffee, a strong perfumey floral with plenty of the heavier berry components as well. There's an extra bit of citric brightness and a slightly bitter sense, as the coffee does skew heavily on the fermenty side of things. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 3 level 5. Let's go through those. And we'll start with the finish level 5. This is what I talk about when it comes to just really heavy processed coffees, and I say that they're overbearing. It was extremely overbearing in the long-lasting finish of this one. Do they have anything for finish? I don't see any level 5s on their tasting wheel, but yeah, I definitely had a much different experience to what they had for this coffee. It just lasted extremely long, and it lasted in a lot of undesirable senses, so a lot of the heavier fermenty qualities to it, and a lot of those undesirable savory qualities to it, they're presented in a very long-lasting sense on the palate, so level 5, best place to put it. And as mentioned, it's in these 2 categories, the florality, level 5. Credit to them, the first note they have listed on here is purple floral, and yeah, it's that very heavy, intense, perfumey floral aspect in a darker sense, so I completely agree with that note. It makes perfect sense, so that's the first note that they have on here. And then the berry fruit level 5, it's interesting to me. I think they have something along the lines of black currant, and I can see that given that it's ever so slightly tart and bitter. But for me, it's much more of those red fruits, that very heavy cherry, that very heavy watermelon, which are qualities that I usually get with natural or anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffees. Truth be told, that's the way that this coffee tasted for me a lot of the time. And that's why the berry fruit did score there at that level 5 mark. It's much more along the red fruit side of things as opposed to that black currant note that they had listed. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 4s. We'll start with the sweetness level 4. Probably one of the most surprising parts of this coffee. They have it also listed as a level 4, but it didn't get to the point where it was unbearably sweet, but I'm not entirely sure that would have helped this coffee one way or another. Having it there at the level 4, I mean, there's enough intensity from the other parts of this coffee, the fruity qualities and the floral qualities, that it didn't really matter where the sweetness was going to score. If anything, it's probably ideal that it didn't score that level 5, but it's still very sweet nonetheless. Acidity, level 4, and I think that's one that they did have pretty high on their tasting wheel, and it's something that I experienced. This is what I say a lot of the time when it comes to these more processed coffees. The acidity can get all out of whack and skew in just a heavier direction than it probably should otherwise. And that seems to be the case with this coffee. I think they have grapefruit note lists on here. Makes a lot of sense, but it's just very, we'll say, acidic grapefruit quality to it. There's so much brightness to this coffee where it could have probably scored even higher than average. That takes us to the citric qualities, which we did have as a level 4. I already mentioned grapefruit. They have pineapple listed on here. It's just interesting how much our tasting wheel does mirror the descriptors they have for this coffee, but it doesn't necessarily replicate the actual tasting wheel that they have on their bag. But that's more intensity to this coffee, as all of those qualities are just extremely intense as expected going into it. And then we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the savoriness level 3. That's the olive-like quality. And I still remember the first time I experienced that, it was from an anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffee. And I said, yeah, this isn't really it. I don't really like this quality. And it's just so blatantly olive forward that I could do without it. And it's one of the main reasons that I avoid anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffees. Body level 3, it is an Ethiopian coffee, but at that same time, it's a more processed Ethiopian coffee. So that kind of tracks where it should probably go. And then the final thing worth discussing, the cleanliness at a level 2. It is so rare these days that we actually score any coffee at a level 2 in terms of the cleanliness. Mostly because even the coffees that we do get that are extremely processed or extremely out there have some level of definition to them. Like you can taste a very defined, in the case of the pizza coffee, pizza-like traits, or even more recently the Coco Bongo, you can taste some very well-defined coconut-like qualities to it. But with this coffee, it's not really there. It's just so heavily skewed in terms of fermentiness, brightness, and just bitterness, a lot of those citric qualities, that you can't really get a very clean picture or definition of any of the other traits within this coffee, whether it be the florality, whether it be the fruit qualities. I mean, the berry fruit is scoring there at the level 5, but it's such a muddled watermelon cherry-like feel to it. Same thing with the citric qualities. It's just such a muddled grapefruit or pineapple-like quality to it, Same thing with the florals. It's just hindered by the very strong fermentiness that is presented within the coffee. So level 2 is where we opted to put it. Truth be told, we could have probably gone even lower, but I do have to say we've had some anaerobic natural Colombians that do score even lower than that. Yeah, this is probably one of the least clean coffees we've reviewed in a very long time. So level 2 is where we opted to put it. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Given that I do have a reputation for having a very strong preference towards cleaner, wash-processed coffees, it will not come as a surprise that this is my least favorite Goût & Co. coffee that we've ever had by a significant margin, as I went into it hoping for intensity, and ask and you shall receive, and this one turned out to be every bit as intense as I was expecting. I think the big issue I had with this coffee was that I was hoping maybe it would have a better defined, much more pronounced berry sense to it, like hoping for darker blueberries, hoping for maybe even a little bit of like a strawberry feel, and hoping for some semblance of clarity, but that was completely shattered the first couple of times we tried this coffee, as it acted much more like my least favorite coffees in existence, those anaerobic, natural processed Colombian coffees, given the very intense red fruit qualities to this one. So not really surprising that I didn't particularly enjoy this coffee, but we do have one more review from Goût & Co. coming up, and this isn't necessarily a knock on them because I didn't expect to enjoy this coffee. I hoped that I would, but it turned out the way that it did. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I know a lot of people really do like their fermentiness, their funk to it, so this one could be an ideal fit in that sense. I mean, it does tick the boxes for what people hope for from these coffees. It's very intense, it's very long lasting, it's very overwhelming. You get a lot of heavier floral qualities to it, you get a lot of heavier fruit qualities to it. To me, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint and identify who I would suggest a coffee to like this, because to me, they almost all kind of taste the same. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Buku Sayisa, supernatural processed Ethiopia from Goût & Co. Thank you for watching.